The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. Space Girl. We called her Space Girl. Her real name was Megan Daniels, but nobody actually called her that. She'd been Space Girl since grade 2. She was the kind of kid who stuck out in the crowd with her long red hair, ghostly pale skin and Coke bottle glasses. For as long as I'd known her, Space Girl had been quiet. She didn't like to be around us. She didn't play with us when we were kids. She didn't even talk much. Most of the time, she'd find somewhere to sit, far away from everyone else. Then she'd open up her little notebook and scribble inside of it. Sometimes she wrote poems, sometimes she drew, but she was always off on her own little world. Nowadays, I understand why we targeted her. She was different, and she was alone. That doesn't justify any of it, but kids can be cruel. I remember that it was Sasha Brown who told me that Space Girl was retarded because her mother was on drugs. She probably just made that up, but we all believed it. She had always been the worst towards Space Girl, and she kept that up until the end. It all started in grade 5 when Sasha took her notebook. It had been raining that day, so we'd had an indoor recess. Space Girl sat in the corner at her desk, eyes focused on her notebook as she methodically worked on a drawing. Sasha and I had been sitting nearby at our desks, and we simply just watched her do her thing. "I can't believe they let that retard sit in with us," Sasha murmured. "Look at her. Why do they even let them in schools? They aren't going to learn anything. Better than leaving her at home with her crackhead mom," said Tanya Everett. She and I weren't exactly friends, but she sat close to Sasha and I. "My dad says he sees a different car in front of her house every day. He says that she lets boys come and they pay her so they can have sex. None of us could actually say the dreaded S word at the time. Sex was still a terrible unknown thing, and we all had been raised to believe that nobody decent would ever do it." Space Girl paused, and her eyes darted away from her book to look at us. I can only imagine she'd heard us. Sasha just stared right back at her. "What? Do you have a problem, Space Girl?" she asked. The teacher was out of earshot, and that gave her carte blanche to say whatever she wanted. Space Girl didn't respond. She just looked back down at her notebook. But Sasha had been challenged, or at least she thought she'd been. She looked over to the teacher's desk to make sure she was busy. Then she got up and moved closer to Space Girl. "What are you even doing in there, retard?" She'd reached out to snatch the book before Space Girl could stop her. "What even is this? A unicorn? What are you, 5? She handed the book to me, and I took it on instinct. There was a brightly colored drawing of a unicorn inside. The artwork was actually pretty nice, but I would never have said so. The book was passed on to Tanya next, and Space Girl could only look at us helplessly. "Wow, you can't even draw. Look at this." She tore the page out of the notebook, and Space Girl let out a startled whimper, as if she'd been struck. The picture was crumpled up, and the book was thrown on the floor by Space Girl's desk. "Draw something that isn't trash next time," Tanya said, and Sasha just giggled, as if it was anything other than being mean-spirited, just for the sake of it. Space Girl slowly picked her book up off the floor, avoiding eye contact as Tanya and Sasha turned away from her. I continued to stare. I remember that the way she moved was so defeated, as if she were shrinking in on herself. She looked up at me, but only for a moment, and I felt bad for her. I really did, but I didn't do anything about it. I just left her to rejoin the others. After that, Space Girl became an easy target for Sasha and Tanya. Every chance they got, they'd harass her, and I regret to admit that I was usually right there with them. During the days where we could go outside for recess, Space Girl would always sit beneath the same tree, always working in her notebook. When she did, we would always lean on the trunk and look down over Space Girl's shoulder. "Wow, that's really good." "Space Girl," was how most of her comments would start. "Did you mean to draw it like it got hit by a truck? Or is that just your style?" There was never a compliment. She would always find something to needle. "Can you draw me?" Sasha asked once. I heard that retards were always like art geniuses or something. Maybe it'll even look like a person. Space Girl didn't look up at her. She seemed to be trying not to acknowledge the insults. I won't pretend like I was blameless either. I never stopped them. And there were plenty of times where I was right there, making fun of her because that was what we did. And we weren't the only ones. More or less everyone hurt her in some way or another. But she never complained. I think she was too scared to. It was late December in 7th grade where things got even worse. I don't know all the details, and I don't know just for how long things had been boiling over, but I'd heard a rumor that James Hardy had it out for Space Girl. James had only been in my class a few times, and he wasn't in my class that year. He was a small, mousy-looking kid who was convinced he was the world's toughest gangster. The rumors said that someone had seen his dad going into Space Girl's house. Naturally, there had been speculation that they'd been having sex. Someone told me that James's parents had been divorcing because of it. Somehow, all of these rumors had mutated into claims that James and Space Girl were dating, and I think that was what had rubbed him the wrong way. We were coming in from recess when some boys decided to pull a little prank on James. The whole prank had been set up by Brian Jordan and his brother Mike. They had some mistletoe for the holiday season and had set it up in the hall leading back to our classroom. Mike had grabbed Space Girl during recess and were holding her behind the door where the mistletoe was. When James walked through, they pushed her at him and snapped a picture. I'd been just behind James when it happened. I watched as Space Girl came flying out of seemingly nowhere, eyes wide and afraid, then slammed into James. They both hit the ground, and I could hear the other boys laughing. "Look, she wanted to give you a kiss," one of the boys said. Space Girl was trying to crawl away from James and pick up her notebook, but somebody had kicked it out of sight. I remember that she looked back towards James, and there were tears in her eyes. She must have been terrified with everything that was going on. She clearly hadn't wanted any part in this, but there she was at the center of it. "You fucking faggot assholes," James yelled as he picked himself up. "Hey, she just wanted to give you a smooch," bawled Brian. "Come on, give her a kiss." Someone pushed Space Girl towards James, and he glared at her as if all of this was her fault. She tried to stand and run, but he was angry and he wasn't thinking straight. I watched as he grabbed her and hit her, a square punch to the jaw. Then he tossed her to the ground and went after Brian next. A teacher had to get in to pull James off of him. He, Space Girl, and the Jordan brothers ended up getting suspended right before the Christmas holidays. We didn't see Space Girl until January. We didn't see James or his friends ever again. On Christmas Eve, there was a car accident on the highway outside of my town. Supposedly, it had swerved off the road to avoid an animal of some kind and gone into a ditch. Mike, Brian, and their parents didn't survive. On December 27th, James was killed while outside shoveling his driveway. My parents told me that he'd been attacked by an animal, probably a deer or something, but that seemed so unusual. I'd never heard anything about deer attacking people before, especially not in my area. I went over to Sasha's house on the day before New Year's. We'd both gotten some gift cards for Christmas, and we were planning to walk to the mall together to use them. Her parents weren't home. They both had to work, so it was just us when I got there. "Hey, kept me waiting," she said when I knocked on the door. "Sorry." "It's fine. I'll be ready in a bit. Come on upstairs. I want to show you something." I didn't question what it was. I figured it was just something else she'd gotten for Christmas, so I went upstairs with her. "You're gonna love it," she promised me. "It's gonna be so funny." She led me to her bedroom, and as soon as she opened the door, I spotted a familiar notebook on her desk. "Where did you get this?" I asked, walking closer to it. Space Girl dropped it when Brian and his brother pulled that prank the other day. She dropped it. I may have grabbed it, you know, just for safekeeping. She cracked a wry grin before opening the notebook. Look at this. She's been drawing the same damn unicorns forever. She didn't even finish this one. She paused at one small picture that was labeled The Unicorn Prince. It depicted an empty field with a blank space where the titular prince should have been. Sasha flipped through the pages a little more until she got to the newer ones. I figured since they kicked Space Girl out for a little while, and her mom is too poor to get her anything for the holidays, I'd step up. What do you think? Sasha wasn't anywhere near as good of an artist as Space Girl was, but the simple detail in what she had drawn turned my stomach. In her first picture, Space Girl was hanging from a rope. Her tongue was hanging out, and her eyes were closed. In the second one, Space Girl had a gun in her mouth. In the third one, she was standing on the edge of a building. Sasha giggled as I flipped through her crude depictions of suicide. There were pages of them. What do you think? She asked with a grin. I'll bet she'll lose her shit. I closed the notebook and looked over at Sasha. Are you out of your mind? I asked. Sasha's grin faded. What do you mean? You stole her notebook, just so you could draw these? Sasha, that's really messed up. It's Space Girl. Who the hell cares about Space Girl? Jane? You just drew her killing herself over and over again. I took the book off her desk. Do you not understand what's wrong with that? Sasha just stared at me like I was crazy. Fine, sue me for trying to be funny, Sasha said. Just give it here. She outstretched her hand to take the notebook, but I pulled back from her. No, you're just going to put something else in there. Anger flared in Sasha's eyes. Jane, just give me the book. No. I opened the book, and I started to tear out those pages of Space Girl's suicide. Sasha lunged for me, trying to grab at the book and stop me, but pushed her back. I didn't mean to push so hard, but I did, and she fell, landing hard on the ground. For a moment, Sasha looked up at me, wide-eyed and shocked. I don't think anyone had laid a hand on her like that before. Then I saw something in her eyes, not just anger, something worse. It was the same thing that had prompted her to draw those horrible pictures of Space Girl. I turned and I ran, bolting down her stairs and out her front door, back into the snow. I clutched Space Girl's notebook to my chest the entire time, and I didn't let it go until I got home. I spent the rest of the Christmas break terrified that my parents would get a call from Sasha's. I'd pushed her, and that seemed like such a big deal at the time. In hindsight, I doubt Sasha would have told her parents what had happened. They would have asked why I'd pushed her, and I would have told them about the notebook. On some level, she must have known that what she'd done was wrong. She was a cruel person, but there was a limit. Part of me hoped that she'd realize that I was right, and we could patch things up when school started again. But honestly, I wasn't so sure. I remember looking through Space Girl's drawings, the ones that she'd done. I remembered the ones I'd made fun of the most. There was one with a mermaid on a rock, combing her hair. Her eyes were closed in a relaxed bliss. I remembered saying how stupid her facial expression had looked, but honestly, I kinda liked it. I flipped through the pages some more, through unicorns, fairies and castles, but I paused at the page depicting the Unicorn Prince. Back at Sasha's place, it had been blank, but at my house it was finished. The Unicorn Prince stood proudly in his field, looking skywards with his horn proudly displayed. Maybe I had been thinking of a different picture. I brushed it off and flipped to the back where Sasha's pictures were. One by one, I started tearing them out of the notebook and tossing them in the trash. It was a waste of paper, but I refused to give it back to Space Girl with those images still in it. On the first day back to school, I was up early. I made sure the notebook was packed into my bag and was out as early as I could be. The snow on the ground was almost pristine as I walked to school, but I remember seeing some tracks on my lawn, headed down the side of my house. Deep U-shaped indents that looked like they'd been made by hooves. A deer, perhaps. I didn't dwell on them and made my way down the freshly shoveled sidewalk and back to school. I wasn't entirely sure if Space Girl would be back yet, but she was. She was alone in the classroom, sitting at her desk and drawing in a brand new notebook. She paused briefly when I walked in to join her, and I could see her side-eyeing me. She didn't say a word as I drew nearer, but I thought I saw her shoulders tense up ever so slightly. "Hey," I said. I hope you had a nice holiday." She didn't respond. "I'm sorry about what happened the other day. I didn't know anything about it, but it just seemed really mean-spirited." Still no answer. I reached into my backpack, taking out her old notebook. I put it on her desk in front of her. She stared at it, still silent, then back at me. Sasha took it. I was over at her house the other day and she showed it to me. I had to take some pages out, but she drew some really awful things in there. I didn't think it would be right to give it back with those things in there. I paused, feeling smaller as Space Girl stared at me. She didn't seem angry or thankful. She didn't seem anything at all, just stoic. "I'm sorry if I wasn't all that great to you before," I said, and then I shuffled off to my desk. Space Girl waited until I sat down before she opened her notebook and inspected it. Then she closed her new book and started something new on a fresh page in her old one. It wasn't much, but it made me feel at least a little good for what I'd done. When Sasha got in, she didn't talk to me. She didn't even look at me. Neither did Tanya or any of our other mutual friends. I knew from the moment they walked in that I'd burned my bridges with them, but I still wanted to try. The teacher hadn't come in yet, so I figured it might be worth it to try and talk to Sasha. I got up to move closer to her, and she gave me a look of utter disgust. "What do you want?" She spat. Now it was my turn to be silent. "Fuck off and leave us alone," Tanya said. "You'd obviously rather hang out with the fucking retard than us, and I really don't want you spreading your retard germs to us. It's a quarantine issue." I stared at both of them, and I could have sworn I knew how Space Girl felt. What was I supposed to say to any of that? Instead, I just returned to my desk without a word. Space Girl stared at me the entire time. Her pencil rested over her notebook, but she didn't write anything. She set it down, tore out the page she'd been writing on and jammed it into her pocket. I later saw her toss it into the trash during lunch. I didn't really have anyone left, so I thought that maybe it might be a good idea to pull it out. Maybe it was something she wasn't happy with. I'd never seen her throw a drawing out before. I was thinking that maybe I could use it as a peace offering of sorts, or something along those lines. When I saw what she'd written on it, I almost threw it back into the trash. "Your words. There is a land where your sorry may go. A sickening land where it always snows. The snow is putrid in color and smell. Its substance filth and things I won't tell. Only your father has been there before. One day your boyfriend will visit once more. This place in your carcass, this humanoid hell. Your sorry can go there to this hole in your shell. My unsubtle message, this subtextual jazz, is take your apology and stuff it up your ass." This was unlike anything I'd ever seen her write. It was so crass and spiteful. This was as close to hatred as she could have gotten. I understood why she'd thrown it out. It didn't fit with everything else she'd done. Those things had been beautiful, despite what people had said to her. This was angry and ugly. This was something she'd written for me. I put it in my pocket. I wasn't going to give it back to her, but I wanted to keep it. I wanted to remember the way I'd made her feel. 8th grade wasn't fun for me. I had very few friends left, and Sasha never forgave me for turning on her. Her version of the story was slowly warped as time went on. First I'd punched her and stolen the book. Then I'd tried to kiss her, punched her when she'd refused, then stole the book to try and get her in trouble. Rumors of me being a dyke spread pretty quickly, and hot on their heels came the rumors that I was dating Space Girl. I tried not to let them bother me too much. I knew the truth, and at the end of the day, I'd done the right thing. By the time high school rolled around, I was hoping for a fresh start. There were new faces, and I figured I could make friends with them before Sasha's rumors spread. I had a bit of success in that department. I fell in with a better crowd at least. Sasha stuck with her same old clique. It grew ever so slightly, but she was determined to live out the movie Mean Girls, and most people didn't pay her any mind. Space Girl barely changed at all. I didn't see her much when high school started. She was in a few of my classes, but I rarely saw her outside of them. Whenever she had a moment, she'd be in the library, usually in one of the corner cubicles, working on her drawings. Sometimes I thought about talking to her and trying to strike up a friendship, but it never felt right. Sasha's bullying never let up, of course. Of course she stalked Space Girl to the library, where she'd pull the same old shit she'd been pulling since the 5th grade. She'd leer over her cubicle and comment on her drawings, picking them apart just like she always had. I stopped her whenever I saw it, but I didn't always see it. Coming to her rescue again, huh, Jane? Sasha asked once when I'd interrupted her. Tanya leered at me from behind her, chewing gum with her mouth open. What's she ever done to you anyways? I asked. She's just minding her own business. Oh? What's she done to you? Dyke? Sasha hissed. She leaned down over her cubicle and looked down at the notebook. Unicorns. 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 Fucking unicorns. When are you going to grow up, Space Girl? Hey! I told you to stop. I rounded the cubicle and I saw Sasha recoil. For a moment, I saw a bit of fear in her eyes. It vanished quickly and was replaced with a familiar rage. Fine, she said. Tan, let's leave the happy couple to their alone time. She pulled away from the cubicle and disappeared with Tanya nipping at her heels like a faithful terrier. Space Girl remained hunched over her notebook, her long red hair spilling over her shoulders. She seemed impossibly still. I turned to leave her when I heard, "Thanks." I looked back at her and saw that she was looking at me. You're welcome," I said. "Let me know if she bothers you again. All right?" "I will, but you're usually there anyways." Her voice was soft and low. I'd heard it before, but I don't remember her ever speaking directly to me. "Yeah, well, it's just not right. She's such a child. One of these days, she's going to have to grow up." Space Girl just nodded, looking over towards the library door, then back down at her notebook again. For a moment, I thought about asking her about what she was drawing. I thought about saying something else, but no, I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I left her alone again. In 10th grade, I took art as an elective. I wasn't much of an artist, but I figured it would be an easy course. To the surprise of no one, Space Girl was there. I actually asked her to work with me on a few group projects. I think the prospect of being asked to work together was foreign to her. She looked at me suspiciously when I did it, but when she smiled, it was the biggest smile I'd ever seen. I went to her house for the first time to work on a portrait project with her once. We were supposed to take turns drawing portraits of each other, and I'd volunteered to let her draw me first. Rumors of her mother had always surrounded Space Girl, so I wasn't entirely sure what to expect when I got there. I certainly wasn't expecting the quiet, neatly kept house that I found. The woman who answered the door looked like an older version of her daughter, sans the Coke bottle glasses. "You must be Jane," she said. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't sound upset either. "Yes, ma'am." "Come on in. Megan's upstairs. She was just getting ready for you." The house was warm with plenty of knickknacks on the walls, plates and porcelain dolls mostly. Her mom sent me upstairs and I didn't waste any time. On the landing leading up to Space Girl's room, I could see a mural of family photos and paused to look at them. I could recognize Space Girl and her mother in most of them. Space Girl never seemed to be smiling. I only saw her father in a few of the very early pictures. Space Girl looked like she was only a young child in the few pictures I saw him in, though. I didn't dwell for long and headed towards what I assumed was her room. The cardboard stars and planets on it gave it away. Sure enough, she was inside waiting for me. She sat facing the door behind an easel in the center of her room. Her bed was neatly made and tucked away in the corner. She had a clean little desk that she'd clearly been working on and had set a chair out for me to sit on. I hadn't expected something so overwhelmingly formal and I almost started laughing, but then I noticed her walls. They weren't just covered in drawings. The art pieces on them were full-on paintings. They were the same fantasy depictions she usually did, but the colors were so vivid. The clouds looked like fluffy pillows and the castles seemed great and infinite. "Holy shit, are these yours?" "They are," Space Girl said softly. She stood up and took the plate of cookies from me, then moved it to her desk. It's soothing, she said after a while. Painting? I picked the drawings I liked the most and I finished them. She spoke slowly, like she was carefully choosing her words. I almost felt like there was something that she was trying to avoid. I spotted a painting on the floor that looked like her father. The style was the same, but the content was different. He was surrounded by awkward scribbles, and he looked completely and utterly terrified. Space Girl looked down at it, but she seemed to disapprove of it. She turned it around so I wouldn't have to look at it. "We should get started," she said. "Sorry." "No, it's all right," I said. I sat in the chair for her. "I'd like to hear about it." Space Girl watched me from the corner of her eye for a moment, as if she doubted I was being serious. But eventually she sat down behind the easel and started to draw. Soon after that, she was talking too. I stayed long after she'd gotten what she needed for her sketch, just to talk. She told me that she'd always liked fantasy, and how she liked unicorns because they were simple but pretty. I hung on to every word, and I could have sworn I saw her smiling shyly as she talked. The portrait she'd done of me was something else entirely. Her work had always been beautiful, but this made me look transcendent. I wasn't entirely sure that I was looking at myself at first. There was something about the look on my face. There was a small, almost content smile there. The warmth it conveyed was almost Disney-esque. "I love it," I told her. "That's incredible, Spa. Megan, that's really great." "You can call me Space Girl if you want," she said. "I don't mind the nickname. Not as much as I mind the people, at least." My awe quickly turned to shame, but Space Girl didn't look upset. She just stared at me blankly like she so often did. No, not blankly. Her face might not have conveyed much emotion, but there was definitely some emotion there. I wish I'd been nicer to you when we were younger," I said. "Is that why you're here right now?" Space Girl asked. "No, I'm here for the assignment. The art assignment. The portraits." She continued to stare. "Did you pick me because you felt bad for me?" she asked. "No, I just thought it would be cool to work with you." Space Girl didn't react for a moment, but then she just nodded. Okay. Her flat tone made it hard to know what she meant by that. She stood up and walked over to the portrait. "Mom can drive you home if you need a ride," she said. I opened my mouth to say something else. I wanted to apologize, but I didn't know what. Had I offended her? Had I said something wrong? "All right. Thanks." It was the only thing I could think of. "See you tomorrow." With that, I left her. I was almost afraid to see Space Girl the next morning. I drifted through my classes that day until I reached art, and when I did, I wasn't expecting what I saw. She had clearly been up late, but what she'd brought in stole my breath away. It was my portrait, but she'd done more with it than I thought possible. She'd painted over the sketch, turning me into something beautiful. Flowers bloomed around my brown hair and a crown of daisies. Lilies and chrysanthemums adorned my head. The colors were so vivid, and I looked so at peace in it. Space Girl was looking right at me as I came in, as if she was gauging my reaction, but all I could do was stare wide-eyed and in awe. When I looked back at Space Girl, she was smiling at me. Her project single-handedly netted us an A on the project, and got the privilege of being hung up outside of the art classroom. Of course, I told her how much I loved it, and I remember the way she smiled when I did. I remember thinking that it was the cutest smile I'd ever seen. My portrait was up for barely even a day before Sasha had to make a comment. I'd been on my lunch, and had just gotten some fries from the cafeteria when she and Tanya ambushed me. "Where's your flower crown?" "Dyke," Sasha said. "Leave me alone," I said, brushing past them, but Sasha was out for blood. "I always knew you were a little dyke, but now you've posted solid proof of it. We've gone and cracked the case, haven't we? So what happened? Did you go to her house and lick her retarded little snatch? You must be a real good dyke because she went and drew that for you." I tried to walk away from her, but Sasha and Tanya just kept following me. "What's wrong? Am I not pretty enough for you, dyke?" she snapped at me. Maybe she only fucks retarded girls, Tanya said. I'll bet Space Girl squealed like a pig when she came. I stopped dead in my tracks, and I heard Sasha stop behind me. I don't know what it was about what she'd said that pissed me off so much. But those two had finally struck a nerve. I spun around, swinging my lunch tray as hard as I could. Fries were scattered everywhere. But although I was aiming for Tanya, I hit Sasha. She went down hard, and I'm not sure if she was even still conscious when she hit the ground. Tanya was on me in an instant. She slammed me back against a wall and kept me pinned. She had size and strength on me, and there wasn't a thing I could do to stop her. Several other students grabbed at us. A teacher finally got involved, and all three of us got escorted to see the principal. As we left the cafeteria, I saw Space Girl in one of the halls, just staring at me. Naturally, I got a 3-day suspension. But Tanya and Sasha were fine. Both of them said they'd just been walking, and I attacked unprovoked. It was their word against mine. Sasha had a familiar shit-eating grin on as she left the office with only a bruise on her forehead to show for her troubles. But there was a familiar look in her eyes. That same anger I'd seen last time I'd laid a hand on her, and something about it scared me. When I came back to school, I realized that I had every reason to be afraid. My portrait was missing. I wondered if they'd taken it down because I'd attacked Sasha, but the truth was a lot worse. Someone took it, Space Girl said. She was sitting in her usual spot in the library when I found her, sketching flowers in her notebook. When? The day after you hit Sasha. I don't think anyone's found it yet. She didn't look up at me, just stayed focused on her art. She didn't need to say it for me to know who she blamed. Who else would it be? I had half a mind to confront Sasha about it, but I didn't know if that would be a good idea or not. Sasha could easily just cry wolf. I wouldn't put it past her. In the end, it didn't matter. By the time I was headed to art class, the painting was back, but there had been some modifications made to it. The words, "Retard fucking dyke," had been painted across my portrait in bright red. I saw it from down the hall and could see some other students whispering amongst themselves beneath it. I didn't know what to say or do, but this felt like too much. The picture was taken down quickly, but the damage was done. Sasha had gotten her revenge, and it didn't stop with just the painting. Space Girl looked different than when I'd seen her in the library. She seemed uneasy, and her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "I'm sorry about the painting," I said softly. She looked at me before sighing. "I knew she'd do something like that," she said. "I'm so used to it by now that it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm sorry she wrote those things about you, though. But you worked hard on that," I said. "I'd be upset too." She just shook her head. "That's not it," she said. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a crumpled up piece of paper, then slid it over to me. Slowly I uncrumpled the paper, and my eyes widened as I recognized what was on it. It wasn't the same drawing, but it was close enough. It was a depiction of Space Girl hanging herself, and me beside her. A caption read, "Retard Dyke Wedding." "There were so many in my locker," Space Girl said. "This is what she drew in your notebook when I returned it to you. This is what I had to take out." Space Girl looked down at the picture again, before averting her eyes. She didn't pay much attention during class. Instead of taking notes, she sketched in her notebook. I looked over a few times to see her drawing another unicorn. This one seemed so similar to the one I'd seen before. She must not have been quite happy with it, though. When I looked back at her notebook, the unicorn wasn't there anymore. She must have just erased it, but it seemed so clean, like it hadn't been erased at all. Tanya was following me on my walk home that evening. I didn't know what she had in mind, but I didn't want to put up with it. When I was in the middle of a small walking path that cut behind some of the houses on my street, I stopped and looked at Tanya as she kept approaching. "What do you want?" I asked. "It's a surprise," she said. "Sasha and I just want you to know how much we love dykes in this town." Oops, I've said too much. I wanted to hit her. Dear God, I just wanted to hit her. But we both knew she could overpower me. Whatever Tanya had in mind, it wasn't anything good. She drew closer to me, unafraid of anything I'd do. "Come on, dyke, go home," she said. "Let's go check out your surprise." In a sudden, horrible moment, I realized that Tanya was threatening me. I also realized that I couldn't outrun her. I couldn't fight her off. I didn't really have much of a choice but to do as she asked. Slowly, I turned and walked towards my house, with Tanya at my heels. It wasn't far, and up ahead I could see Sasha sitting on a park bench. From a distance, I recognized the red gas can beside her, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Tanya seized me by the arm and pulled me towards the bench. Sasha just watched with a wide, manic grin. "Hey, Jane," she said. "How's it going?" "What the fuck is this?" "Just wanted to chat," Sasha said with a cold chuckle. "You think you can get away with pulling the shit you did the other day? No, you've been treating me like garbage for years. And for what? Because of Space Girl? You know who you're fucking choosing, right? Right? God, I hate that retard girl. But you know what? I hate you even more, acting like you're better than me just because you feel bad for her. You're crazy." Sasha just laughed. "I'm not the one who clocked someone with a fucking tray just for a little bit of teasing. You're absolutely fucking psycho." On the bench behind her, I saw the portrait that Space Girl had painted of me. Sasha picked it up and tossed it in front of me, then picked up the gas can and dumped it onto the canvas. "You want to be a dyke? I don't care, but I'm not letting you and your retarded whore put your shit up. So say goodbye to your little project. Sloot." Sasha reached into her pocket and took out a book of matches. Her grin widened, before suddenly vanishing outright as she looked at something behind us. "What the hell?" Tanya said, and I craned my neck to try and see what they were seeing. As for believing it, that was another story entirely. Standing on the path behind us was a unicorn, but the way it looked was all wrong. This was nothing like a regular horse. Its body was plain white and almost textureless, save for the many thin blue lines that ran along its body. It looked like it had been cut out from a sheet of lined paper, but that was impossible. It had to be impossible. Neatly done grey lines defined the shape of the horse. In fact, the lines reminded me of the ones Space Girl used. This unicorn looked like it had walked out of one of her notebooks. Tanya let me go and stumbled back a few steps, wide-eyed as she stared at the advancing unicorn. It let out an angry noise before charging straight for Tanya. She panicked and tried to run. In her desperation to escape, she bolted down the path, but she couldn't outrun the paper unicorn. It lowered its head as it drew nearer to her, and in one swift movement, the horn pierced Tanya's back, impaling her straight through the chest. She screamed as she was hoisted off the ground, and the unicorn circled back to fix Sasha in a murderous glare. Tanya looked down at the massive spike sticking out of her, her eyes clearly wide with horror, and her body twitching its last spasms as the life quickly drained from her. The unicorn lowered its head to let her slide off of its horn, and she hit the ground in a bundle of limbs. Sasha and I stared in silent horror as the unicorn reared up on its hind legs and brought its hooves down upon Tanya's body. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply lay there as she was trampled again and again. I can only hope she died quickly. Sasha dropped the unlit match and took a slow, terrified step back before toppling over. I stumbled back and looked down to see the portrait of me at her feet, but it had changed. That beautifully painted version of me was now leaning out of the canvas, invading the real world and clutching Sasha's leg tightly. Still with that look of contentment on her face, I watched as the painted me slowly slipped back into her panting, and she took Sasha's leg with her. Fuck. Fuck. Fuck! Sasha desperately swatted at the painted me, but she couldn't overpower it. She couldn't escape. Her nails tried to dig into the pavement as she was slowly dragged into the canvas. She looked at me in horror, silently begging for help, but all I could do was stare back at her in silence. "Jane! Jane, help! Please! Please!" The hands of the painted me reached up, seizing Sasha by the hair and forcing her down into the canvas. It was like watching something pull her underwater. 1 minute she was there, the next she was gone. I stood silent in the park, staring at the painting, Then at the paper unicorn. The unicorn huffed before retreating off into the woods, and then I was alone. Slowly, I approached the painting and I looked down at it. It had changed, and now it depicted Sasha, her mouth open in a horrified final scream. After some hesitation, I picked up the painting. I could return it to Space Girl in the morning. They chalked Tanya's death up to an animal attack, and nobody ever found Sasha. I never asked Space Girl about what I saw. I don't think even she knew the answer, although she certainly knew much more than I did. High school was 10 years ago, though, and I've chosen not to remember as much as I can. I've got my own life to live now, and I try not to ask so many questions. Sometimes I see paintings move, but I don't bother with a second glance, and I never ask my wife about them. She doesn't like to talk about it, and I won't ever force her. The painting of Sasha hangs in her studio at home, right beside the painting of her father. Sometimes I look at it and I wonder if maybe things could have been different, but I don't feel too guilty about it. I wouldn't feel too guilty if I heard another story about a suspicious trampling or animal attack either, but to my knowledge, there's been nothing of the sort. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. I do my best to make sure nobody hurts my beautiful space girl. Story 2. Ketchup on Satan's burger. Cancer, as known to the state of California, is this bag of roasted peanuts, is what she said. I wasn't paying attention anymore. I was staring instead at the goat. I think that goat was actually Fred, and we just didn't know it yet. We were still on our little detour when it started getting dark across the desert. Rather quickly. I don't want to drive back in the dark. Let's stay in San Piana, Gloria had said. That's when what appeared to be the same goat crossed our path. I had to slam on the brakes, a cloud of road dust flowing over our vehicle and hovering over the road before us. I think that's the same goat, I said. I looked and saw it was atop someone's roof, staring down on us with red glowing eyes. I felt nervous while it looked at us. Its blackening silhouette against the evening sky looked sinister. Ew, I hate goats. Gloria got out her phone. We have no reception out here. I checked my phone, she was right. Let's find a place to stay for the night. Then, I told her. We left our car parked in the middle of the dirt road leading into the village and took our bags to the nearest shack. I banged on the door. A little old lady opened the door, with half her face looking like it would just fall off her skull at any moment. Excuse me, we are traveling on our way to my sister's wedding, and we decided to drive this rental car. Now we are stuck here for the night, because the road back to civilization from this little detour is too dark and treacherous to drive back at night. So, we need to stay here tonight. She said nothing, but reluctantly shuffled out of our way as we brought in our bags and made ourselves at home. I looked around at the little hovel, and despite looking like a primitive shack from the outside, it was rather clean and tidy inside. Not too bad. I thought it would be filthy in here. No vacancy, the old woman grumbled. Yes, of course. We have this little bed and breakfast exclusive to ourselves. I smiled, sat back in her rocking chair, and put my dusty boots on the coffee table. The little old lady remained stoic, but I could tell she wasn't used to civilized folk. We took over the bedroom and left her on the couch, whining rather unprofessionally about her arthritis. In the morning, the lazy stiff had gone cold, forcing us to make our own breakfast. While we were eating, the village's chief showed up. He was wearing a brown button-up shirt with a logo on it that vaguely looked like a county sheriff at a glance. Mrs. Summers has expired. He noted the little old lady was still wrapped in an afghan on her couch. Yeah, could you help me with that? She smells gross. I went to one end of the couch and indicated that I needed his help. He reluctantly assisted me while we took her and the whole couch outside and left her on the porch. Now I'll have to wait here with her until they can come get her. We have wild animals around here. Toman sat, looking sad. Why the long face? I asked. It's sad she's gone. I've known Mrs. Summers since I was little. How'd she die? He wondered. I shrugged. She was old. My wife brought out our bags. glaring at me for not helping. Well, we'll leave a nice review. I patted his shoulder and then left him there. We tried to drive out of San Piana, but as we turned around, we couldn't quite find the road that led back the way we had come. We circled around for a while the villagers came out to see what we were doing. We waved as we drove past them, and finally I stopped and asked how to get out of town. They all pointed in eerie unison, with weird blank looks on their faces. I was feeling a little bit creeped out by them. I was about to roll up my window, but never did. As we were about to go, the goat came running at me from nowhere and ran its horns into the driver's tire. I never would have believed a goat could puncture rubber with its horns and tear it open like that. The whole car was being lifted on the impale, the goat bleating angrily. When it was done, it trotted away like nothing had just happened. Suddenly the airbags deployed. Help! We were shouting for help. The villagers just stood there, staring at us. You are chosen by Azazel. You shall carry our sins, and the rotten soul of Mrs. Summers with you, out into the desert. Toman was suddenly at my driver's side window like a jump scare. I was so surprised I gave him a high-pitched bark and almost slapped him. After the goat attack, my nerves were shot. Your goat did that. You'll pay for the damage, I proclaimed. All in good time, Toman said with certainty. I got out of the car, my knees wobbling from the scares. What sort of place you running here? I want to see the manager. I shoved Toman and yelled. You will see him. Toman's eyes looked like goat's eyes when he said, him. I felt a chill, despite the warm desert sun. I got back into the car and said to Gloria, there's something wrong with this place. She said nothing and I looked to her seat. Empty. Gloria? I got back out and looked around for her, seeing that the streets were now empty. Everyone had gone back inside their shacks. Gloria was nowhere in sight. I began walking around, banging on doors, looking in windows and searching for her, demanding to be told where she was. The villagers all played dumb, shrugging and acting like they didn't know any English. As the minutes began to add up and I couldn't find her, a cold, sweaty panic burst out of me. For about an hour I just ran around the place, looking desperately for her. When it got hot out and I was exhausted, I found myself sitting on the front porch of Mrs. Summers. Toman came walking up. There you are. I had to come find you, see if I can help. Where's Gloria? I asked, exhausted. I'm sure she's around somewhere. Toman lit a smoke and looked at the empty couch. Looks like Mrs. Summers has gone missing. I looked and saw her corpse was removed, leaving only her shroud and some suspicious paw prints, like a team of oversized coyotes had dragged her away when nobody was looking. I shrugged. Gloria is missing, I pointed out. Toman nodded as he realized I couldn't care less about the local wildlife problems. People go missing sometimes. They always get found sooner or later, Toman said, somehow mirroring my attitude about the missing old woman. But regarding Gloria, I started feeling hostile towards him. Do you know where she is? I stood up, trembling and sweating. Of course, but it won't do you no good. She can't be found if she doesn't want it. Toman blew smoke at me, dropped his smoke and crushed it underfoot until it was a mess of tobacco, ashes, paper and the filter. Still there. He dusted his hands off on his jeans and walked away, leaving me there looking at the wisp of smoke hovering ephemerally over the ruined cigarette. I heard coyotes howling in the distant hills in the middle of the day. I heard wind chimes making discordant sounds. I heard the bleating of the goat sound like laughter, and then the cackling of the old woman who I knew was dead. I sat, and from my feet a numbness of fear began to climb up my legs like tarantulas. My skin was like braille, and my sweat ran in rivulets into stains darkening on my clothes. My eyes stared, listening to the desert while it spoke the name of its lord. I was afraid. I knew I was against something that wanted to eat me, somehow. Where are you? I asked Gloria, my voice a dry, cracking sound. I went into the old woman's shack and poured some of the iced tea she had made at some point before she died. It tasted like tomatoes with a hint of almonds and made me feel sleepy. While I walked to the couch, I dropped the glass and fell over. Darkness made me blink, my eyes darting around for any source of light. All around me, in the midnight desert, candles stood upon cooled, melted stands made of old wax, atop human skulls. I was tied naked to a cactus. My body seemed to be covered in writing done in ketchup. There was a humming sound of many human voices, not an unpleasant sound, except in the circumstances it frightened me to know I was surrounded by people humming in unison. Gloria was standing at one end of the triangle, holding a nosegay bouquet like it was some kind of offering towards the darkness. She wore nothing but an open hooded robe of shimmering crimson and scarlet. I always find my wife exciting, so despite her betrayal, I still think she looked hot as a satanic priestess. I'm pretty lucky. The third corner of the triangle was an old woman wearing the skin of an oversized coyote, and also slippers made of coyote feet. She howled dramatically, and her voice was answered by a disembodied growling from all around us. I peed myself in terror, glad I wore nothing to absorb it. Instead, it just ran down my leg and collected under my left foot. I wanted to scream, but I felt weak and frightened, unable to do more than whimper pathetically in mortal dread. Gloria looked at my mess and smiled weirdly at me. Azazel, take from our community our sins. Take our sins to the desert. Leave us another 6 years of peace. We offer you the slaughter of the scapegoat. Lord of the wilderness, accept our humble sacrifice. The gathered creeps were saying their prayer slowly in unison. They repeated it word for word again and again, long into the night. Something was coming closer. Something was coming. All around us, desert creatures hopped and leapt and swooped, chittering, yipping, barking and hooting. Thousands of beetles, centipedes, tarantulas, snakes, scorpions, mice and crickets swarmed everywhere except the hot wax and flames of the candles. I cried and shivered, moaning in horror as the creatures crawled all over me. The glowing eyes, a shade of golden brown, loomed from the darkness. As the shape of the entity formed in my mind around the darkness, it was cloaked in. Sleep overwhelmed me. I straight up fainted at the sight of Azazel. The early dawn found me in the back of our rental car, driving on a spare. Gloria was driving, getting us to her sister's wedding on time. Why? I choked out a word. I wouldn't bother, but his business is in jeopardy. When we cross the border into that state, we are in the territory of one of the most corrupt governments on the planet. Technically, California is part of the United States in name only. Everyone knows their government is run entirely by criminals. The new laws will eliminate her new husband's franchises. They'll lose everything and have to live with us. I hate my sister. You know that. Gloria enlightened me to her insane political opinion and family drama without answering my question. You're telling me all that was about burgers and ketchup? I wheezed, needing a drink. With this, Gloria held up the bridal bouquet. My lord will bless their union. She cannot be made poor by the dealings of other devils. They are all on the same team. You know, Team McDonald? I asked. Team Humanity. They just want what's best for us, Gloria explained. Demons want what's best for us. I tried not to sound too incredulous. No, you are missing the point. Humans make the sins. They just feed. They are fair. If you ask them for a favor, they'll take care of you. Like getting someone elected, I guessed. Yes, exactly, Gloria agreed. I stared out at the scenery of Angel's Crest National Monument as we drove. We arrived at the wedding and I kept thinking about how good Gloria looked as some kind of Satanist last night. I requested we spend some married couple time together, and she considered it, but said we had no time for such things. She promised we'd spend some quality time together after the wedding, provided I play for her team. I can't promise anything, I said honestly to her. For whatever faults I have, I do insist on being honest with my spouse. We parked in the alley and got ourselves ready to go into the wedding, still looking like we were out all night, despite 20 minutes of details. We need to get going, Gloria urged me. I was still fiddling with my tie in the passenger's mirror, since the driver's side one had a crack in it already. I kept reminding myself how this car was a rental, as the thought was easily slipping my mind under the stress I was feeling. I hate weddings. We went in, and the place was simultaneously too loud with all the murmuring and too quiet with all the whispering. I kept hearing words of profanity, and would look up to see if any of the holy statues were reacting. No weeping or bleeding. It really freaks me out when statues cry and bleed and have flesh underneath when they get damaged. I'm pretty sure there are actual religious orders where they entomb their saints alive, after eating a diet of herbs meant to sedate and preserve the corpse sealed inside. Not too freaky. But I am just one person being judgmental, aren't I? I realize I am sort of disrespecting their whole culture in a way, and that's not how I mean for it to sound. It's just not for me. I get scared. That's all you need to know. The blurry way the statues looked had me standing in front of the bride's aisle while everyone was wondering what I was looking at with that look on my face. I'd provided the distraction Gloria needed to ensure absolutely nobody except her saw her make the switch of the bouquets. She had an exact copy of her sister's bouquet, unironically. Out behind the church we met, and she had started a small fire in a coffee tin with holes around the bottom rim. She closed the knife she'd used and used the long neck lighter to get a couple candles going on the side. "Hurry, someone might see us," I said as loudly as I dared, half hoping someone would hear me and look around the corner. I couldn't help it. Part of me was against whatever we were doing. I still felt nervous. Nervous we'd get caught or that we'd get away with it. My anxiety had me holding my hands like I was warming them to the fire. And white goes softly into flames, and black comes the smoke, pure and thick. Gloria dropped the blessed flowers into the flames. Amen. I coughed. "Let's go watch her get married," Gloria growled. We went in, and there was a wedding that happened while we were in our seats. While most people were on their phones, texting or whatever they were doing, others actually watched the wedding. I looked around and saw how some people were observing the ceremony. I too was looking at it, but trying not to. I knew I was seeing something there that they weren't, and it was pretty scary because I knew it was real. Therefore, it was invisible to all of them except me. I leaned over to my wife and asked her, "Who is the goat up there with them?" "That's Fred. She's like a bridesmaid," Gloria whispered back. "Fred is a girl goat?" I asked. "I can arrange for you to have visits from Fred. Sweetie, if that's something you're into." Gloria teased me weirdly, but I didn't really find it that amusing, just creepy. The last thing I wanted was to be haunted by an invisible goat demon. "No thanks," I said. When the bouquet was tossed, Gloria caught it. She'd run in, shoving all the maidens like a quarterback. Some of them had fallen and gotten serious scrapes and bruises. Her sister yelled at her, but Gloria just looked at me, and we took off around the corner and went for our car. "Why aren't we leaving?" I asked. "This has to be under her bed on her wedding night. My sister is a virgin. She has to be given to her new husband first." Gloria waved the bouquet in front of me, gripping it the same way she had gripped her foldable dagger earlier when she'd cut the coffee can. "I have a feeling you mean Azazel." I gulped, realizing I couldn't go that far with her. I had to find a way to stop this. "What's that?" Gloria asked me sharply. I'd best dealing be with Azazel. I tried to change what I'd said, botching it horribly. "No, you said something else," my wife said firmly, and frowning. I had a feeling my bed had just gone cold, and it scared me as much as the devil's, because as I mentioned, Gloria is what's best in my life. "I don't like this," I admitted. I also mentioned I really don't lie to her. She won't know the difference. Gloria smiled a little bit, a kind of evil villain-styled smile. I found it too sexy. "Either way, it's wrong. I'm not sure exactly how, but it seems super perverted and evil, and I won't allow it," I proclaimed. Gloria slammed on the brakes and flicked out her knife and held it to my throat. "Get out." I was left standing by the side of the road with my bags as she sped away, driving to some unknown honeymoon destination to put some cursed flowers under her sister's bed to summon some kind of husband demon for her wedding night. I'm pretty sure I had to stop this from happening. You still fighting the good fight? Ronald McDonald stepped out from where he was waiting to catch a bus. I love my wife to death, but she is trying too hard to ruin her sister's wedding. I sat on my bags, feeling tired and my eyes watering. Don't cry, Ronald McDonald told me. You got to man up right now. This is your chance to set things right. I sniffled and tried to smile for Ronald McDonald. He smiled back and we shared a moment on that desolate highway. I've got something for you, he told me. He handed me a toy from a Happy Meal I'd gotten as a kid, the Muppet Baby Fozzie. I assembled his armor and put him on horseback. When I looked up, Ronald McDonald had caught the bus and was waving goodbye to me. That's when the tears started. I knew I had to step up and stop her. I wiped them on my handkerchief and got my phone out of my pocket. I used the app we had to find where she was, after figuring out how to use the darn thing. Then I used another app to summon a professional getaway driver named Breeze. She arrived in less than 4 minutes, the sound of her engine in earshot for the whole last minute as she took the 3 miles of road between us with fury. We said nothing to each other. I showed her the destination and the review I'd already written, and 9 $100 bills, and she gave me a hand signal I guess meant we were in business. We caught up to Gloria, and then I found the only likely honeymoon spot, a desert view bed and breakfast. Of course. We got ahead of Gloria, and Breeze accepted her payment and vanished into thin air, leaving only burning tire tracks in her wake. I reached into the newlyweds' open car and released the parking brake. With a muscle-pulling, ankle-twisting, hernia-inducing, disc-slipping effort, I got the darn car moving. With the toy in my pocket making me pretend I could do this, I got their vehicle into the ditch, out of sight. I went into the bed and breakfast and checked the guest registry. I was sweating and my suit was coming loose all over. I was limping and groaning, although I wasn't feeling what I'd done to myself yet. I looked at the names. They were here. With the page torn out, I started a new entry for the weekend and made up a couple fake names before the owner found me there. Sorry, I said. I set the toy on the counter and fled. I watched from the bushes while Gloria went in. See, I find simple plans without a lot of moving parts work best in any situation. Gloria found no evidence she'd come to the right place. The owner was already freaking out and gave her a stern goodbye. Gloria tried to call her sister but got nothing. As she drove away, my terrified state began to subside. I collapsed in the bushes, sleeping with a butterfly on my eyelash keeping me company. You did this, Gloria was saying. I was in the back seat of the rental again. She was smoking, and she'd smoked enough that the little strip had turned yellow, indicating we would be charged a cleaning fee for the damages. There was no ashtray, so she was just putting them out on the dashboard, leaving little burns and ash everywhere. Her phone chimed, and I saw she was chatting with one of her old boyfriends. She made sure I saw this. I rolled my eyes. It's not like we'd spent 20 years married. Her interrogation techniques needed improvement, especially since she would know I don't lie to her. I'd never seen her smoke. Not that I could remember. Not for a long time. I was under a lot of stress, but as I thought about it, she was smoking the whole trip. My mind played a weird montage of all her light-ups. I felt like it needed a theme, so I hummed the theme to that show we were just watching. Then I looked at her and stopped humming that cue for the other person who hums to hum along. You know what I mean. There should be a word for that kind of cue. Probably is, but I'm not fluent in music vocabulary. She didn't get it, but instead got mean and lifted her hand like she wanted me to stop humming because it was annoying or something. I stopped. You're not even Gloria, I complained. Took you long enough, the creature grinned. My mind went wild with terror as I realized she was some kind of horrible demon disguised as Gloria. She handed me the toy from McDonald's and it started to melt, becoming warped and evil looking. Her laugh sounded like a stretched audio recording of a laugh, all distorted and demonic, exactly like the best horror movie Foley artists make it sound, and making me pee from my frozen spine bone and dry eye sockets staring till my eyes hurt. Demonic laughter is unforgettable. A kind of maddening sensation, like something is being ripped out of you suddenly. A painful disorientation that you never quite stop feeling dizzy from. It's an ache, an unhealing wound of the psyche, always oozing and causing me some kind of misery. It lives there, like a tiny flea, too small to squish or catch, in its hole, in my mind. Weirdly enough, the horrible little toy it gave me contains it, and that is why it must never be touched. For although it is a burnt figurine, it imprisons a part of the wilderness of souls. I held it there and looked up at the not Gloria. She looked just as relieved and bewildered as I felt. She was Gloria again. I could tell it was her. "Where is it?" she asked me. I held up the toy, having already dropped it into the burnt coffee tin to contain the prison for the sound that the demon had become when I'd listened to it, pretending to be my wife, therefore listening to my wife also. "How's that work?" Gloria asked me, sobbing. She wanted reassurance it wasn't going to take control of her ever again. "Well, we are in this together for better or worse," I figured I'd say. We weren't helping it. It already got me, using my hate for her against me. Remember when we got the wedding invite? I thought it was weird there was a goat with glowing red eyes drawn on that. I pointed out. I never really wanted to hurt her. Gloria felt awful. I hugged her close and kissed her forehead. "I'm the one who got hurt," I reminded her. We went over all the things like cactus and such that I'd suffered. Dehydration, scares, murder and mayhem, dagger stabbings, cannibalism, arson and demons. It was agreed I was the hero in all this, and I finally got some ketchup on Satan's burger. It was delicious. Story 3. I used to geocache, but after what I found this last time, I'm deleting the app and never geocaching again. My friend Ahmed and I met through geocaching. We used to joke that we couldn't have been more opposite if we tried. Our world's so different it was like a bird from the sky talking to a fish from the sea. Who was the bird? And who the fish? Changed depending on context. We bonded over a particularly difficult cache. It turned out to have been washed away by a storm, and soon our expeditions together were the highlight of my week. But our lives got busy. He had kids. I had my career. Once a week became once a month, then only an occasional thing, and we dropped out of touch. Once COVID hit, I got laid off. Messaged Ahmed to see if he'd be up for geocaching, since it's one of the activities one can do outdoors during the pandemic. He went geocaching a couple times with me, wearing his little daughter Ayan on his back. Adorable. But it did limit how long he and I could be out hiking. And then life got busy again. Anyway, the reason I'm writing this post is that recently I hit another hard point in my life. I came out to my girlfriend's family, thought they'd be accepting, only to be bombarded with snide remarks about my pronouns, not to mention the constant misgendering. My girl kept telling me to stop acting like it's such a big deal. So I went back to my old escape, pulled up the app, started walking, looking for caches, letting my mind drift and my legs carry me, anything not to have to think. Going more and more remote after I found all the geocaches in my area. I even messaged Ahmed, though he didn't respond. Bitterly, I thought perhaps he wouldn't accept me now, which is unfair of me. He was deeply religious and a conspiracy theorist, and I'm a pink-haired punk atheist. But we talked deeply and always found common ground. Anytime I jumped to assumptions about him, he'd prove me wrong. He said the same about me. I tried making new friends in the geocaching community. I went with a group once, went another time with some gal named Debbie and her daughter, but just didn't feel that connection. Maybe it's the place I am in life. There was one name that kept showing up on the logs, Ahmed's, and at first I was excited. My old friend, back in the game. But when I messaged, his reply disappointed me. Him, sorry Blake, can't. Life, you know. And then, a few minutes later, him, try this one. He sent me a link to a specific cache. It was marked with the highest difficulty. I went out there but couldn't find it. This seemed another washed away in a storm scenario. and I told him so in messages. He told me to keep looking. I finally asked if he could give me a hint, anything, but all he said was to keep on. And after an hour, frustrated, I called it quits. After that, I tried reaching out again to ask him to come geocaching with me, but he had the same excuse. Life, you know, but I kept seeing his name on the log sheets. I became obsessed, told myself I would get to a cache before him. He'd been to every single one that I found, even as I was going to more remote locations from our usual stomping grounds. Me, how are you doing this? Have you hit every single cache? Him, keep looking. Me, are there any you haven't found? Him, keep looking. Him, keep on. Friend. Me, how about I come with you on the next one you do? It's been too long. Honestly, I could use your advice. Him, sorry Blake. Can't. Life. You know. Me, kids keeping you busy? How is Ayan doing? Him, walking now. Daddy's so proud. I stared at the text, puzzled, feeling a slight chill. She learned to walk during the pandemic in 2020, 4 years ago. Me, all right. For real, what's going on, man? Him, keep looking. So I went out, opened the app, and searched for some caches I hadn't been to yet. One's further out. Found one on a hike deep into the woods. So remote it wasn't the sort Ahmed would usually go for now that he had kids. Still, my old friend had already marked it. This time, though, I took notice of the date, 5/20/2024. I went for another one nearby, this one an easy find in a picnic area. It was the same. Ahmed had marked it for exactly the same date. The next one, too. In fact, all the caches I found, even the ones I'd found back in our city where we lived, all had the same date. I know because I went and double-checked. All the 20th of May of this year. The same day he'd started messaging me after ghosting me for weeks. But he couldn't have found them all in a single day. Impossible. No matter how much he trekked around, that was just too many to mark. I was deeply chilled now, terrified, and then my phone pinged with another message. It was Ahmed again. Him, keep looking. What else could I do? In some ways it was like old times, a treasure hunt. There was something I had to find, a cache. The only cache he hadn't found first. There had to be one. And then I remembered the impossible cache, the one he'd sent me the link to that I hadn't been able to find. I went back there, messaged him. Me, is this the one? Him, keep looking. Again, I hunted up and down. The sun was sinking lower in the sky. I couldn't find anything out here in these woods. It should have been right here by the trail, shouldn't it? I threw my hands up in surrender, and since the sun was looking beautiful over the rocky bluffs, I went ahead and started climbing the rocks upwards, thinking to clear my head a bit. Him, keep looking. The hairs on my arms prickled as I stared at that message. I climbed further, but got nothing. So then I hiked downwards along the slope, deeper into the wooded undergrowth. Ping! Him, keep looking. Deeper still. The sun had lowered enough that the long shadows stretched like skeletal fingers had now become a blanket of shadow. And there was a chill in the air. And the smell of wet earth, leaves, that fetid reek of damp earth, and something else, every now and again, a faint unpleasant undertone. Ahmed didn't do social media. One of his conspiracy theories was about how much data those companies collect on you, to use for nefarious purposes. Actually, that's less conspiracy theory than truth, I suppose, but one I ignored, whereas he angrily sought to thwart their efforts to spy on him. But he had family members on Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram. Surely, I should reach out. I thought, should search for them. Maybe they'd posted some of what's going on. He'd mentioned a sister once, Sahra. I searched for her and found her on Facebook. My phone pinged as I slowly stepped further down the slope. Him, keep looking. The earthy smell was stronger now. I opened Sarah's page. Unlike her brother, she posted often online. I had to scroll, but not too far. Before I started seeing the posts, my brother is still missing. Please pray for him to be found.
Ping!
Him. Keep looking. From the posts on Sarah's page, it looked like he'd been struggling. There'd been a lot he hadn't shared with me recently. We'd hardly seen each other. After all, apparently he and his wife were separated. Wow. His sister worried he'd done something, maybe, that he might hurt himself. The Ahmed I knew would never have considered it. But how much did I really know him? We were geocaching buddies, that was all. And yet in my heart, I couldn't believe he'd do something like that. Not while his daughter was still alive. Not while.
Ping!
Him, friend. Him. Sorry, Blake. I stopped as my boot crunched on something. Looked down with a gasp. Just a plastic bottle. My heart relaxed. But then I noticed something else. In the dim light of dusk, I turned on my phone's flashlight to see better and swept along the shaded undergrowth, and there was a flash of blue from a jacket, hidden now by leaves and the undergrowth. A jacket, an arm, a hand, and now again I noticed the smell. When I tried later to show Ahmed's family the messages on my phone, I couldn't find any, nor did any of the caches still have Ahmed's name in the logbook. It was like I'd hallucinated all of it, but based on the state in which he was found, authorities believe Ahmed was hiking the trail, went climbing along the rocky cliffs and fell, hit his head, lost his phone, injured and disoriented. He didn't make it back to the trail. Crucially, their findings showed that he had not taken his own life. He'd just been doing what I was doing, out in the woods, sorting out his shit, geocaching, and then when he wanted to keep climbing, to work off some of that frustration and uncertainty, he slipped. He needed his family to know what happened to him, that he hadn't intentionally left them, hadn't intentionally left her, his daughter. He needed her to know. There's one more thing. I gave up geocaching after that, got back to life. But after I broke up with my girlfriend, I finally opened the app again because I was just feeling so low, trying to run from the world. And when I opened it, I saw he sent me one more message, urging me away from the dark thoughts bubbling in my brain. Him, keep on, friend. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.